Hi there, I'm Sebastian. If you've been asking the question, why doesn't she love me? Why? Why doesn't mom love me? Why doesn't my neighbor love me? Why doesn't my boss like me? This is the podcast for you. Listen up. Why doesn't she love me, contact me anymore, care about me? When I think about this question, the first word that comes to mind is fear. The second one, judgment. Why fear and judgment? Because when we judge something in the world, with what measure we judge ourselves, fear comes when we think about how others would judge us. The inevitable question then becomes, why? Let's start from the beginning. I have a perfect example in my mind that I believe will shed some light on this problem. Without going too far into the person himself, on the surface, this client came into my office. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, looking like the perfect specimen of a 35-year-old lawyer. He had a tailored and starched white shirt, silk pants, and a silk suit jacket. His stature was statuesque, about 6 feet tall, beautifully chiseled features, hair combed just right, teeth white and straight. When he spoke, his words were eloquent. As he shared about his life, he seemed like he had the perfect home, a very prosperous job, a good family of origin. Nothing seemed out of order, except that nothing seemed out of order. Did you ever meet someone who was too perfect that you almost began to wonder if the person was real? That was this client. I can attest to how the person was because for a long time in my life, I felt as if I had to be perfect for people to love me or even like me. A few times in my life, after a couple of dates, my suitor would say, I think we aren't going to work. And with great honesty, he would say, you're just too perfect for me, or too smart, or too handsome. I always walked away from the situation astonished, mostly because the last thing in the world I was looking for in a date was perfection. So let's go back a step. Why would anyone feel as if he or she has to look or appear perfect to attain love? My client came to me with a big issue. He had been dating a woman that he had fallen for. And suddenly, without provocation, it seemed she decided to be with an old boyfriend. She left this perfect man for someone else. Now, he was left with some questions. All of them started with the question, why? Why wasn't I the one she chose? Why wasn't I handsome enough? Why wasn't I good enough? Why wasn't I a good enough kisser? Did I treat her good enough? Did I give her enough gifts? Was I romantic enough? Was I sexually satisfying? I could fill a book with the questions this man had about himself because of this woman leaving him for someone else. He was stymied by why anyone would leave this perfect ego he had created of himself. He, I assumed, would look in the mirror and see the reflection of his looks, smell his fresh breath, imagine the way he kissed his lovemaking, the way he talked to her, and then think, did I call her too much? Was I too attentive? Whatever the questions, he ended up with a big hole in his heart, and worse yet, feeling like he had lost his self-esteem. When I looked at this man, you wouldn't imagine that anything could place a hole that big in his self-esteem. He could go out and get any other girl he wanted, but that wasn't the point. He wanted the very thing he couldn't and wouldn't have. So he started on a course of trying to win her back. This led him to even worse self-esteem. She began to manipulate him, take him back for one night of fun and sex, and then leave him again. He entered into her game, thinking that if he could get her to go out with him enough times, he would prove he was the perfect man for him. perfect, perfect, perfect. So as the therapist, the person he asked to help him disengage from the pain, this game of hurt, the first thing I had to ask myself, why does he think that he has to be perfect to be loved? And why does he want to be with somebody who apparently is just using him? Two great questions. But when you're in the middle of this kind of feeling, you don't care about the rationale. So I began to ask him questions about his childhood. Who needed you to be perfect as you were growing up? Who required you to be a perfect specimen to be loved? Interestingly enough, he didn't believe that anyone imposed this on him. No family member insisted on him being perfect. He looked around and noticed that if he wanted anything or something in life, he was going to have to be smart, intelligent, good looking. And if he created this persona to be all those things, then anything he wanted, he could achieve. Pretty good thought. This was all well and good when he was playing the game as the man who pursued and then dumped women like they were pieces of candy in a box of chocolates, when you're looking for that one coconut and nut crunchy piece and all you keep getting these cream-filled centers. He would try and then release. In so doing, he began judging everything around him according to the standards he imposed upon himself. The women he chose were the cream of the crop, but if they had one small flaw, he would discard them. The problem was they weren't that person. They didn't want him. What do you think this kind of judgment did to his self-esteem? With what measure of judgment you impose upon others, you impose upon yourself. So deep in his subconscious, he was almost looking for a purpose. Who would dare to judge him with the measure he judged them? When he found her, he held on to her. They were the perfect match. That is, until she decided he wasn't good enough. There was someone better. Then what happens to the fear, the judgment? Judgment of any kind to your brothers or sisters, anyone you meet, will put a measure of self-judgment in your subconscious. That measure of judgment will eventually work its way up to your consciousness as fear that someone would judge you with that same measure. The question is, how will you meet that judgment? My client met it with an inability to understand. How could anyone not love me? How could she treat me this way when I treated her like royalty? When I loved her, made passionate love with her, when I took her to expensive dinners, gave her expensive gifts. How could anyone treat her any better than I could? If this is true, then she would want me back. So I guess the opposite comes to your mind. If she's not taking him back, then all that other stuff isn't true, which leaves a big hole. In other words, he met this fear of judgment with his ego, his self-made, perfect ego that told him that he was the perfect specimen and couldn't and shouldn't be shot down by anyone. When he thought about this hard enough, he went out and found another handful of women who thought he was perfect and bedded them, and nothing made him feel better about himself. The one he wanted didn't want him. How can he correct an error in judgment that large? There's only one way, and the way is perfect love from a perfect God. That sounds pretty airy-fairy spiritual, but listen. You see, God doesn't judge his children. There are certain sects of religions that believe in a quid pro quo God, one that rewards good with good and judges evil with condemnation. But this is not the one true God that made Adam, his son or daughter, out of the perfection of itself. that God couldn't and wouldn't judge that perfect creation. He doesn't see negative in anything it created. It is, by the very nature similar to the ego in that sense. It doesn't see itself with any measure of negativity because it is perfect love and goodness. The difference in the ego and God's perception is that the ego judges everything outside itself according to its own perfection. God's love lets all of its creation come to know perfect love without any judgment. Whatever you need to do, good or bad, to understand love and be one with it will not even be seen by the Creator. God has no potential for polarities of good and evil because it's pure good. Then you might ask, what created the polarity that we are clearly in on the earth realm? It's a really good question. It's a question that a lot of people who are spiritual ask. What judges you is the law of the world, the law which you created, or which we all collaboratively created as humans to make sense of this chaotic world. And the law stretches over all humanness in a way that keeps us entangled in a level of egocentricity that puts everything we see in front of under a magnifying glass of judgment. The unfortunate problem about this kind of law and judgment is that it creates fear and guilt that rises to our level of consciousness and can't be dismissed. If we live in this world of judgment, we will be judged by it. The law of cause and effect. How do we get out of this world of judgment then? The truth, and there's only one way out, and that is the Holy Spirit. But what is the Holy Spirit? I know you have many preconceived ideas about that in your mind, but let's look at it kind of differently. The Holy Spirit is the manifestation of God that stands between the perfect and the imperfect. It's kind of like the translator of all good to human consciousness. It's the intercessor in between perfection and non-perfection. The perfect density, the perfect vibration, and a very low density of humanity. It's the answer to judgment in this world. And when we bring any perception in this world to the Holy Spirit, we hear one thing: love. What would love do? What would love give? What would love say? Love is the answer. Love is the answer to judgment. Love of your brother, love of your sister, love of self, because you can't truly love yourself unless you see your brothers and sisters as spotless, as perfect, as part of that one perfect God. When you can rise to the level of this kind of judgment, you'll have to hear and feel no more fear or guilt. This is a tall order. I remember one time I was in a church service and a minister asked us to live an entire day without judging anybody or anything. I think I lasted like 10 minutes initially, maybe less. But I continued to try, and I would get farther along, but it was a constant struggle. The process of not judging, or the prospect of not judging, is so difficult because from the beginning of our earthly existence, we have been taught by words. Words have specific meanings. We're verbal human beings that learn very young that words not only have something specific they refer to, but what they refer to has a name, a relational frame. Not only does that reference have a name, but it has an opposite. It has something I can compare it to. It has similarities with other things. And if this is true, then that is true. In our outer world, in the place where we live and work, these kinds of word relativity allows us to be the king in the animal kingdom. Our reasoning skills make us able to live in a world where there are lions, tigers, and bears that are much stronger and more powerful and much more vicious than we are as humans. However, in the emotional world of humanity, this kind of reasoning, this evolution of reasoning, this kind of relative judgment will only lead us down the trap of thinking that all things have reason, which is not true at all, especially where love and like is concerned. Think about it. What causes you to like something? Can you put a finger on the exact thing that allows you to invite any person into your life? It's kind of an energy, isn't it? It's not a something. It's not a specific thing. It's a feeling. I've been attracted to all kinds of different looking and acting people, friends, partners, romances. There's no specificity about it. It's something I can't even define. Yet, with emotional connection, we want to be able to define it. So, to the client that asked the question, why doesn't she love me? Why doesn't mom love me? Why doesn't my boss like me? The answer is simple. Because he or she doesn't. We must, and you must, simply feel that reality. Feel the hurt of it. Feel the pain of it. Wallow in it for a while until it becomes your reality, something that you accept. Then and only then will you be able to move on. Because real love wants another person to feel love, to feel freedom, to feel the ability to want to come back to you and receive love. So true love would answer the question, what would love do in that situation? Love would release it. Love would release the person to the situation. You found somebody that you love that's deeper than the love we had. It hurts a lot. But I'm going to accept that. I need to accept that because it's the reality of this situation. Then and only then will you be able to move on. I hope that helps. You have an amazing day. You have an amazing time tonight with the people you love. And reach out. Remember, the question you always want to ask yourself is, what would love do? Have a good day.